Hi, Juan Pablo. How are you?
Doing well. How are you guys?
Yeah, good. It's good to see you since we last spoke, and thank you very much for taking my call. It's really good to have this conversation. So, um, I'd like to start. Thank you. I'd like to start by asking, like, where did you come from? Like, we all know about Juan Pablo Mas, the person who's like, fronted action potential for years and is now leading a new fund. But who were you and where did you start from, your roots, and what kind of brought you to where you are today?
Oh, thanks. Well, no, I appreciate you having me on and the opportunity to talk about everything we'll get into is terrific. I appreciate you asking about my like origin story, I guess. And so yeah, I grew up between Puerto Rico and Massachusetts. I was in Puerto Rico and raised there till I was about 5 years old. My parents, who were both from Santurce, San Juan area, were headed to grad school. So they picked up and moved to Amherst, Massachusetts, and UMass Amherst with me, a 5 year old, and my brother, who was just a little over 1 year old. Um, you know, they, as many couples do, didn't have the smoothest path during that period, and I got divorced shortly after moving to Massachusetts. So my mom really took care of us and raised me and my brother from those ages really for the next 9, 10 years before she got remarried, and so we'd spent our school years and academic years in Amherst, Massachusetts, and then our summers with my father and extended family in Puerto Rico. And eventually, when I got older, it became like where I did summer jobs working in a family restaurant and the busboy and a waiter. And I think those roots really still are important to me, and I still spend a lot of time with the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Puerto Rico and founders investing in or starting health tech companies and the like. But I think that period of time, especially from like the ages of my teen years, were very much about the importance of education was instilled in me, drilled into me. Engineering was a path that sort of I had some family members who had pursued, and so certainly had a lot of folks suggesting and telling me that would be a great path. And I enjoyed the maths and sciences, and so it was a logical space for me to want to study in college. And I didn't know what areas I wanted to apply it in, but that was certainly the beginning of like my interest in electrical engineering. And I thought maybe in aerospace, exploring outer space and the universe was something really interesting to me. I'd taken astronomy classes. I volunteered at an observatory, Amherst College Observatory. So on weekends, I would show people the sky and talk to them about what they were seeing. And so it always kind of gave me a sense of peace to look at something as big or everything as big as it is in the universe. Made my, whatever stresses and challenges a teenage kids going through kind of felt like they were put into perspective. So initially, I thought maybe I wanted to do that. I got into it also music engineering as an area of interest, acoustic engineering, thinking I might go work for Bose. Um, and then later, got interested in the brain and sort of like the almost like the inverse of the universe, right? It's sort of the unknown part of our body and the human experience, and thought that that would be just an amazing area to study and to try and solve problems within the context of medical devices and medical technology. So that kind of came over time in grad school, and you know maybe at an early age, I was definitely very much sort of the kid who was working hard in school, studying, playing sports. I played soccer and lacrosse, but eventually focused on lacrosse and played that in college at UMass, and also uh, you know, was pretty big into the arts. So I did a lot of theater. I did a lot of singing in bands, choirs. So I always liked having, my fingers in a lot of things and kind of interested in exploring things at the intersection of all these disciplines. And I think that kind of was some of the foundation that led me to want to uh, invent things and be an engineer, and then eventually entrepreneur, a co-founder of some companies. and ultimately an investor into like where things were going, and again across disciplines in particular. So yeah, those are some of the themes. Certainly, my mother and uh, my brother, like that was our core family unit for so many years, taking care of each other, and all, kind of certainly shaped me into kind of the person I am today.
Thanks for sharing that because I know that's really special. And you and I have spoken before because we've got similar backgrounds. Like I grew up in Spain, I'm half Spanish, and my mother and father split up. And like my mother brought me up pretty much as well. And, it kind of shapes you. I never felt like I fitted in anywhere, but I kind of fitted in between lots of different groups. And I think you and I have got that in common in that we can fit in with lots of different groups and your brain seems to work that way as well in that you were never quite wanting to go into a silo, you didn't want to go pure engineering or it's like you've moved into the drug, the electronics, the device, you kind of like that space. And I think you mentioned there about your brother and the lacrosse, and I think one of the things that's constantly stood out was like the influence Larry Briggs had on you. Is that correct in terms of you tell me a bit more about that and how you carry that forward, just for people who don't know?
Yeah, yeah, it's great. I appreciate you bringing that up. So Coach Larry Briggs was my high school coach and middle school coach in lacrosse in Amherst, Massachusetts, at Amherst Regional High School. He also was an assistant coach on the football team, but just one of the kindest people you've ever met. Everybody who knows Coach Larry Briggs through many generations at our school, has a special place in the heart for him, and he in particular for me instilled kind of the um, values of the origins of lacrosse and the importance of the origin story of lacrosse and how this was a Native American sport, the first sport in the Americas, that we were gifted and able to play and lucky to get to play. And so he and my cousin Mario, who was 10 years older than me and a star lacrosse player in college, went to the same high school. Um, they both instilled. I mean, my cousin Mario would run through the forest with a lacrosse stick, dodging trees, uh, sort of in the spirit of the origins of the game, which is called the Creator's Game and the Medicine Game, because it was thought to be spiritual and was used to, um, resolve conflicts between tribes and so forth. But Coach Briggs would have us. He would tell us stories before in practice about some of the earliest lacrosse games in history, and then he would later, before every game, have us do a chant, which was a traditional Native American chant, uh, to both pump us up and also kind of intimidate the other team. But it was a very important part of my kind of attachment to the sport and then desire to play at D1 at UMass, where I was lucky enough to play for Greg Cannella. And most recently, just a few weeks ago, actually, was back in Amherst for my college coach's Greg Cannella's retirement after 30 years. And I didn't know Coach Larry Briggs would be there. And I saw him out of the corner of my eye at the reception. I went up
Which is
there.
so meaningful.
Yeah, it was phenomenal. So we all got together for pictures, and Coach Briggs remains a part of the massive cross tradition same town. So he still attends practices most every day and grabs balls and is there to support the team. It's just a really special human being.
And what did he see? Because I think you've always said that he saw something in you that perhaps you didn't see in yourself, and I think that's something that you've carried forward, isn't it, into how you work with founders and others?
Yeah, I mean, I think he was, the idea of seeing people for more than they are, for seeing people for more than what they made themselves believe themselves to be capable of yet. Um, he definitely put us in positions of, leadership earlier than we maybe perhaps thought. And, uh, I think he's always been kind of a deep presence in that regard. The same is true of a lot of the coaches I've had, Greg Cannella, same with some bosses I've had. I remember Russ Hodge at Medtronic, not a sports relationship, but someone who, when you mentioned that anecdote, it took me right to Russ at Medtronic, where I was applying m- the biodesign philosophy at Medtronic towards kind of ideation and coming up with new products in the cardiovascular realm. And I remember one day Russ pulled me into a room full of all the executives up at Medtronic's cardiovascular division and asked me to take on a new. So sorry for this tangent, but it just came to mind. Asked me to take on some new project around trying to reduce the COGS and the cost of manufacturing catheters and wires for cardiovascular procedures in Danvers, Massachusetts, where at the time I had a job. And he said, please use the biodesign program to reduce the cost by 20% and do that in 2 years, sort of a plan to bring the cost down in 2 years. And if you're successful, we can keep this entire manufacturing facility here. He did, yes. Yeah, and if you're not, we're gonna have to let go of these people and shut down the facility, and that's a mandate from corporate, and so can you please come in and do that? And I said, "I don't know that the biodesign program is or methodology is intended for reducing costs on a manufacturing line and through a supply chain." Uh, and ultimately, he convinced me it could be applied, and he was right. We managed to succeed. We brought the whole site and organization, people from different parts of and different functions to come and identify those opportunities, and we managed to save that facility and that those jobs. So it was really fulfilling, but it was a very much an example of what you described, where I was sort of not sure I could do that or it could be done, and someone said, "No, you can do it. Like, we're gonna get this done. Let's do it together." And they saw something in me that I hadn't quite seen myself yet.
Yeah. I guess I could really take that forward in so many ways because I guess, some things that I'm thinking about is how you see that in the people who you then invest in and the founders who come in front of you. Like, how does that manifest itself when you're looking at people?
Yeah, I always I think like so many people, like your instincts kick in when you're meeting somebody and you decide whether or not you trust them, whether or not you know, see them being successful, respect how they treat others around them, um, manage challenges, even if it's just in a simple discussion, if how do they manage being challenged? Um, who do they decide to shine a light on in terms of their success in their organizations? What, you know, uh, pronouns they use in terms of like we, us versus me, I, uh, so those are elements that you kind of gauge really quickly. I've always been attracted to, uh, and drawn to, I should say, the founders with sort of either personal mission, lived experience, and also those that approach things with a problem solving mentality and mindset. I think that's a little bit of like the engineer in me sees the scientists and engineers kind of breaking things down to first principles and seeking opportunity to fix things. I know two folks from Stanford Biodesign who we've invested in, Michael Ackerman and Kate Rosenbluth, both founders in our portfolio in the past. Always impressed me when they were in diligence when we were asking them questions, and they would, with the person who says to you, you ask them a question and they give you sort of an off the cuff response, and it's not particularly believable, but they're trying to convince you that they're right and or diminish the question. Um, More often, like that's not really an important question. Uh, Versus those who say, "Hey, like I actually don't know the answer to that, but I'll find out," and they come back to you a few days later with insights from some expert in the field to say, "Listen, managed to get in touch with so and so, figured out that this is the answer to your question. Whether it's important or not, like we can gauge together." But doing that on repeat, and I see that in a lot of founders that just are looking to get smarter themselves and learn more themselves, as opposed to sort of convince others that they got this and nobody really, they're not looking for guidance or advice. Those are some of the things that I'm always keeping my eyes on with folks. And over time, um, certainly there's a balance, right? Certainly there's the importance of being able to sell and to fundraise and to tell a story that draws not just capital into the companies, but also high quality and experienced talent and recruiting others as a sales skill, of course. So, I'm looking for these combinations, the special combinations and founders. And, and I would say in particular, thinking about um, people that come from kind of different walks of life, right? I think there's a lot of herd mentality in venture capital and even areas where companies are being founded and looking for kind of unique perspectives and a unique take is rare, and so sometimes it makes you look crazy or feel crazy when you're investing in some of these ideas. Um, but that's often where like the alpha is, and where uh, that the unique opportunity lies for whether it's a you know a product idea, or even a business model that may be different.
I mean, looking at like, you stepped out of Medtronic and I know that you won Innovator of the Year. I think it was something, you obviously did that project and saved, lots of people's jobs and learned a lot about yourself. And then you moved into venture. How did that happen?
Yeah. So I was leaving Medtronic after having applied to business schools, and I was interested in starting a company. I wasn't quite sure in what area. Um, I then later, and on my way out the door, I actually had a conversation with Jason Weidman, who was the head of pipeline strategy at the time, eventually became the head of GM of coronary and renal denervation and other things in cardiovascular. And he's like, I know you're going to Stanford. Like, what are some interesting companies you think would be, interesting to intern with or to get inspired by? And so we started talking about a few things, and we started talking about renal denervation in particular as an area of interest. And at the time, Ardian was a company that this would have been in 2008. Ardian was a company getting off the ground out of the foundry data in Menlo Park. And the idea of treating hypertension with a catheter-based procedure really caught my eye. The neural mechanism of action certainly intrigued me in light of some of my interests in neurology, neuroscience, et cetera. And so, Jason urged me to kind of go out and meet the team, and I was like, "Yeah, I'm going to do that." We were sort of in BD ourselves, and I found all the investors and the board members around that company, and I said, "I don't know anybody in venture, but I'm gonna go knock on doors, and I'm gonna talk to folks who are investing in companies that I think are exciting." Um, and met Hank Plain, Alan Will, a variety of, folks, obviously Andrew Cleland, the CEO, um, and was just really inspired by these individuals and their paths, former operators turned investors, folks who have been s serial entrepreneurs in particular, um, taking big swings of big opportunities with new mechanisms of action, category creator tech businesses, um, you know, really impactful things more than just incremental innovation. And so I got to talking to them and eventually realized like I actually would enjoy a summer in venture capital if I could find the right team. So I was lucky enough to have a couple summer internship offers, one from Morgenthaler Ventures, working with Hank Plain and Jason Letman in particular, and then one with more David Ventures, Sue Siegel, and the team at MDB. Uh, um, I ended up going with Hank and Morgenthaler and was very happy to have done that. I think in part because of the connection to some of those companies. I stay close to Sue Siegel to this day. She and I talk regularly. She's always been a mentor to me, and so I, you know, very lucky to have had these two people in my life. Then the getting into venture then became. I told Hank when he offered me a summer internship, I'm not sure I want to do venture. I just want to learn how to get companies funded and understand this process and understand how they're evaluated. He said, "Yeah, come on board." And that summer was such a unique experience. I sat around the board of Ardian as an observer. I saw the phase two data be revealed that led to Medtronic, who are also on the board, leaning in and deciding that they wanted to acquire the business. And that became a whole business unit in the early days of renal denervation. That again, full circle came back to Jason Weidman, who then ran that division and was part instrumental in acquiring that business. But it was just so exciting. I honestly I remember after leaving that board meeting, my pulse was, higher and racing. I was really, it was just so much interesting tension, drama,
Yeah.
and then I said, "If this is venture capital, I think I want to do this." And so I think that was the moment, frankly, that kind of hooked me. And then Hank and team made me a full time offer, so I worked with them somewhat on and off over the second year of business school, and then full time when I graduated.
That's amazing because I was going to ask you, what was it that kind of made you hesitate about going into venture capital? What did you think it was going to be like? And then when you got there, obviously the adrenaline kicked in. What did you realize?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, this kind of comes back to what are you exposed to, and finance was not an area I was exposed to much. Um, Not by my upbringing, not by my peers. I kind of had this stereotype in my mind of folks on Wall Street who were financial engineering and were spreadsheet jockeys, and the movies would depict people in finance as oftentimes like out for themselves strictly and not concerned uh, with others around them. And that was the stereotype that was a little bit burned in my brain. And that was definitely, challenged immediately by working with that team, with those individuals and with the foundry folks and the founders. I mean, I really liked the idea that this was early stage, getting your hands dirty with the founders, talking to them in between board meetings, trying to make connections for them. I mean, I'd go to animal studies occasionally, lab, and you don't typically see that from investors. So actually, I know your connection with Fred Kashravi. I remember attending. Uh, this was at my time at Medtronic. I remember attending an animal study with Fred as he was developing access closure, and Medtronic had acquired a company in the vascular closure space called Angiolink, and so there was a bit of a head-to-head dynamic. But it isn't too common. You often see engineers and founders and entrepreneurs in animal studies and cath labs and such, but not typically investors. But this group really invited me in to like say, listen, like let's use all your experiences and let's let you run with any of these things wherever you can add value. And that to me made it a stark difference to the stereotype that I held about what being on the finance side meant.
And how is it carried forward? Like you went into action potential, or and we can talk about that. But how does that manifest itself for you and your team that have been together for years? I know you're changing structure at the moment, but what is it that people see different about you guys rather than in other investors? And why have you been so into the neuro space? I know you've moved into other areas slightly, but brain's always fascinated you as much as like the stars did, didn't they? Because there's so much unknown and there's so much like potential there, I suppose.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think that is exactly what drew me in. Um, I would say what we're known for certainly. So I'll complete the story here in terms of uh, order of events. So after spending a few years at Morgenthaler, we spun out the life science team. We merged with ATV Capital's life science team. Both groups had invested in Ardian. There was a shared history there, and formed Fund Lightstone Ventures. So I was part of, coming up with the names and the logo and the colors and the website and the materials for coming out with Lightstone Fund One, and supporting on the founding team in that regard. And we managed to raise Fund One, started doing investments out of Fund One, and shortly thereafter, GSK, the pharma company, announced an initiative in an area called bioelectronic medicines. And this was around 2013. And, this was very much around the brain and the nervous system and treating chronic disease by using the electrical signals of the body and creating healthy organ function implicated in a variety of chronic diseases. So I found it fascinating. We had investments in the space, Ardian being one of them, although that was denervation rather than nerve stimulation. That Point Medical, which was vagus nerve stimulation for autoimmune inflammatory diseases like rheumatoid arthritis and multiple sclerosis. And, Nuvera, which was a COPD nerve ablation to prevent exacerbations of people with COPD. But these are three things we had invested in prior iteration. Now this pharma company was putting a stake in the ground saying, we believe in this category and we want to lead in this category, and we're looking for an investor to join our team to help us, you know, seek out these new opportunities. So I viewed it as it was ironic because I had a lot of my peers saying, hearing that I was going to leave Lightstone to join Action Potential, and a lot of my peers would saying, you're going to get even more niche, like you're getting into a smaller universe of investable opportunities. And from my perspective, it was the running room was there. The In our lifetimes, we would not understand the brain and the nervous system completely, and I wanted to become an expert in this field, both from personal interest, but also because I believed in the many new categories it would open up for therapies that would compete and have a daily like better safety profiles and tolerability profiles than the drugs that were treating some of these diseases. And so that was the basis for the shift. And certainly we have shown that the breadth of and by we, I mean like the industry really, because we've invested in a sample of them, but there are many other neuromodulation, bioelectronic medicine companies, neurotech companies that are treating just a broad number of diseases and conditions. Um, and and that was always extremely satisfying. We have perhaps fewer degrees of freedom on the technology itself. It's either an implantable device, you might get a microstimulator or a miniaturized device, you might have a wearable device, you might have a fully non-invasive therapy. Increasingly we're starting to see even drug device combinations for some of these categories. So the the tool set's expanded. I just think the application set will continue to unfold in really exciting ways, including degenerative diseases and conditions of CNS. And so, I also believe that you know some of the more interesting opportunities for near term, uh, reaching patients in a faster time frame will come from non-invasive technologies as well, and some of which we've invested in. So that's what has attracted it. That's what attracted me to the space. That's effectively what the last 10 years have been for our team, investing in this category, and of course more recently we've spun out of GSK. We can talk about that too, but that's certainly the passion and interest and belief in neurotech remains, I think, defined more broadly for us now.
Absolutely, and you've got more opportunity, and I found it fascinating really that GSK were, open enough to actually consider, and this is about them, but just like a pharma company investing in medical devices is like, actually, for me, like really, yeah, right on. If because it's we all know that you can't just crack one problem one way. There's going to have to be lots of different ways that we approach this, and it could be like you were talking the drug device combinations. I think this is where the future is going to lie, and that's going to be a harder underwriting risk for you guys in terms of weighing up how we do that, which is perhaps like the future that you're hinting at. Um, so you're saying like the future, you see it expanding, perhaps merging across different categories. As an investor, I sit on the other side talking to lots of not founders who say they struggle really to be able to find investors who can assess the risk across all those different areas because each one's got a different risk profile, hasn't it? And
Yeah.
this is like really now very sophisticated underwriting risk or risk assessment. How are you dealing with that coming forward now into this new age, if you like?
Yeah. I mean, I would say I've certainly learned a lot in the last 10 years, investing in action potential in the last 15 years, across Morgenthaler and Lightstone as well. Um, and the industry has changed and regulations have changed. I think strategic interests of acquirers have changed. What's palatable to public investors and what can get public has changed. Certainly, as investors, you're always looking for, what is the end goal, and trying to identify, is this building a massive company that needs to be public, and we should hold our shares, until they're fully optimized. And so are these long stretches, and some of our companies have absolutely been those stories where um, they've been successful. They are successful. They're evolving into even greater successful stories and outcomes, but they've taken 12 and 15 years. And that works inside of a corporate evergreen fund model like Actual Potential was. It may not work for the traditional investor with a finite life fund cycle, 10 years, 12 years. Um, and so, I think there's certain projects that really work well for different types of investors. I'm always talking to founders about this, who to talk to when they're, starting their business. Be realistic about how long this company will need funding and development before it sees an acquisition or an IPO. So full time is an important consideration for all investors. I think we've been really fortunate that we've had a high hit rate of companies with a technical hurdle that they need to overcome, and hypothesis, or a clinical physiological question that they want to go prove in a clinical trial typically. and where our investment came in before that, um, and have been able to see us clear that near term uh, risk that you're describing. And so it's easier typically to diligence those near term risks. I think what's harder is certainly increasingly in medical devices, acquisitions come on the back of revenue and eventual profitability and the ability to scale and grow meaningfully. And so, when you're an investor, if you know that that is when value inflection occurs and when acquisitions or exits can occur, you have to be realistic about what happens between, proving, for instance, that this stimulating a particular nerve can, for instance, treat rheumatoid arthritis better or equivalent to other options available. Um, and, that versus, well, what about the regulatory considerations? Is this a known path, or is this going to be brand new to the FDA, for instance? What about payment? Do you have a code? Does that procedure have coverage? How does that look with CMS, Medicare in the US? How does that look, with private payers or commercial payers? Um, those typically I have found have been the more challenging, t- riskier elements of investing in not just this space, but really anything where you are pushing the boundaries to something new and novel. Um, you know, I think that's what a lot of investors are either sort of naive to, and then they jump in because they think the idea is such a big idea that it'll sort itself out. Um, where they have different incentives and they're more interested in the product hitting market rather than the financial return or the timeline. Um, you know, versus others who say, listen, I'm just going to move and wait till later stages of investing before when all this thing's cleared. And then I have clarity on, uh, what does commercialization look like? And so to me, that's a disservice, unfortunately, in our system to innovation and, promotion uh, of big ideas and founders taking big swings when it's heavily regulated and reimbursed. Thankfully, we've had a lot of experience navigating that. And I think that's one of the strengths we bring to our companies and the founders we work with who may be new to the space or navigating with new technology in this day and age is lots coming from the AI side of things. And I think Neurotech stands to benefit immensely from the influx of signal processing, computation, machine learning, systems and solutions that involve both hardware, therapy, diagnostics, sensors, and software services and user experience differentiation. So, like to me, it's one of the most exciting times. But I think we're always approaching these questions with how big is this opportunity? What's the earliest you can get to, product market fit, commercial ramp, and how reliant are you or how risky is your reimbursement regulatory path in front of you? Because I think a lot of founders are just learning that for the first time. So certainly we like to be a partner in that one.
Yeah, and I think, that's probably one of the great benefits that you bring because as you said, you've had these long bets that you've seen, they've been risky, but you've chosen well and you've seen them through and you've learned a lot over those years and there've been successes which you can now implement as you go forward into this new venture about how you've underwritten those risks. But for those people who are starting with like something, that is completely blank, you really, everybody says we want disruptive. Well, obviously, if you're disrupted, there's none of these codes out there. You've got to go through a new pathway to regulation. It's not going to be commercialized. You know, how can those individuals either approach the investors, but also de-risking it along the way so that it is attractive? Because I hear that a lot. It needs more de-risking, more de-risking, more de-risking.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think first off, when founders are hearing that, this needs to be de-risked further or come back to us after this next round, I think the first thing founders have to ask themselves is that um, am I hearing sort of a consensus around that particular point? Is this feedback I'm getting from lots of people? Or is it just the easiest way to pass on a company that I'm just don't have time for or isn't hitting my priority list? And so I think I would just want to make sure founders always think through and ask follow-up questions. to understand the true signal that they're getting back from the marketplace and investors. So that's just a side point, but an important point for especially first time founders. Um, in terms of de-risking, the truth is I think that dynamic is flipped on its head in different sectors. So historically in medical devices, I think you're seeing show me more de-risk and show me more de-risking. Uh, but if there's a time to market where you can start generating revenue in the next 1 or 2 years, and um, you have obviously, a value proposition that should appeal to either the provider, the patient, the payer, all the above, then I think people start leaning in. That's not a function of how many things have you necessarily uh, de-risked. There may still be commercial questions and so forth, but it is the difference for most medical device companies. And the truth is, in tech, it's on its head right now, right? So many raising pre-seed and seed is quite easy for companies, especially when they're leveraging AI and verticals known for needing new technology, healthcare being such a critical one or obvious one. Um, and so I would say, what makes those early stages easier for companies developing that type of technology is one of two things. Either it's the time to commercialization. A lot of seed stage companies in health tech and frontier tech are generating revenue either already or they are quite soon. They're not necessarily regulated, and they don't have a business model that allows them to start with one product and then layer on more regulated technologies or products in the future. Um, or it's just a little bit of a hot and heavy, frenzied environment around AI that's leading to dollars flowing in there, and so or it's a little bit of both. But the truth is, it's always been the case that unregulated companies that can generate revenue and show traction are able to raise money in a more meaningful pace earlier. It doesn't mean that they're necessarily less risky or that they'll necessarily be more successful on balance, but it is the it is predictive of, like, time to exit. There are few medical technology companies now, or sectors, I should say, that are where you're seeing acquisitions before FDA approval and reimbursement or before, um, commercial traction. And many, certainly in neuromodulation and neurotech, it's been more often that those companies get acquired on revenue, once they're commercial. So you have to go after big opportunities. Then many times you have to you have to see paths that this company could, make it as a public company, a standalone company. And increasingly, that's like multi-product companies are needed there, deep pipelines. So the bar isn't getting lower, but I think that for founders going after really inspirational, big ideas, unique ideas, and, and especially those where they have first mover advantages, um, that's kind of where it all starts. And then I would start asking yourself, being honest with yourself, like, when how much capital and time do we need to go de-risk the main thing that is holding people up from investing or from acquiring? And if it's not, if the equation doesn't work, then you should be honest with yourself. Um, and if it does, then you should educate people who may not understand that.
I want to take a minute to say thank you to our sponsors, TTP. TTP is a leader in complex medical device development. With deep scientific and engineering expertise, they help medtech teams crack tough development challenges and make the right calls early, reducing rework, delays, and uncertainty later on. Whether you're navigating uncharted technical territory or racing towards market, TTP brings clarity and real-world judgment to the decisions that shape performance, usability, and manufacturability. By retiring risk early and grounding innovation in real-world constraints, they help you move forward with speed and confidence. To find out more, check out the show notes.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And you've mentioned a few things there about some of the companies that I'm looking and working with, who've gone initially into the wearables as a bit of a Trojan horse, I think, to then move into the medical space. But they're using that to get the data, to get the leverage, then to be able to convince and move. There is a lot of AI companies, and I think you've got some concerns about that and, some thoughts around, what differentiates one from another. What advice have you got for investors, or not investors, but um the many steps that are in that space? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think, I'm a believer in this category, and we've had companies in our portfolio, a couple, one that um, is developing radiomics and imaging foundational models for predicting outcomes for cancer patients. You know, and then that same technology could be used for uh, helping a pharma company, you know, with a secondary endpoint, with a exploratory endpoint, with the ability to screen patients for clinical trial to enrich patient populations and increase the odds of winning a study proceeding forward. And that company has two commercial strategies that they have. It's the ability to hedge and evaluate where you're getting pull from the marketplace and traction is one approach. They're obviously solving a really important clinical need, um, but you never know which side of the business will take off faster. And so I think that's one learning. I think with Trojan horse, very common, and I think can work great, but you really need to nail the first application, the first go to market, because to generate meaningful data and to have that advantage when it comes to then developing on that pipeline of products, um, you can't struggle as much with that first go to market. It really needs to be a strong product market fit such that you maintain that advantage or you develop that advantage. Um, I think some folks in medical devices and life sciences have historically been burned by ways of technology that have been promised to be the saving grace for any industry or the future of the industry, only to find out like, wah, wah, it's not here yet. And, a lot of money has gone in that direction and uh, there's still too much to learn. Uh, I think that has painted some folks to be conservative in their instincts and their processes and their propensity to invest at certain stages or what their firms need to see before they jump in. I think this is a totally different uh, era right now that we're in. And, you know, I think both can be true in that I think there are lots of opportunities that have huge potential impact to re-engineer the healthcare system at all the various layers, uh, across the patient, provider, payer, the therapies, the diagnostic companies, like everything will look different 10 years from now. And uh, some things much faster than others. But at the same time, so I do think we lean in, and I do think that the opportunity is now to be part of these sort of generational tech companies that will challenge the incumbents or become incumbents themselves. At the same time, there is also a lot of hype, and so I think the having the nose to differentiate between uh, you know companies that are kind of vaporware and still and promising big outcomes. If I'm in a founder's shoes, I would be hiring and attracting talent that had experience in the industry, whether that's medical experience, product development experience in healthcare, navigating regulatory and reimbursement strategies. Even if you're a consumer product with a Trojan horse strategy, because you're going to get there quite soon and you need to be planning in advance. Um, I think the stories of Elizabeth Holmes and others, that were around like myself long enough to have seen those pitches and heard that story of Theranos when it was being unraised, founders that come in and promise big vision but don't have the data and the information to support what they're building and what their the credibility and the validation of their technology. Um, that's an instance where very few experienced medical investors invested in that business or businesses like that because they didn't see the data and they found it suspicious and interesting that they weren't being shown the data when asked. And I think that continues will play out here in this period as well, where there will be, can you show the data? Can you show validation? You don't. I mean, AI works in different ways, and some of it is black box, and you may not always have lineage and the ability to sort of audit how a recommendation is being made, and so there's inherently a challenge there in technical diligence. Um, but where it touches the healthcare system and where it touches patients and where it touches, safety concerns of medicine in general and the safety ethos that I think we all carry in this industry, the bar is higher. And so I think founders have to recognize that they have to deliver at a different level. if they intend to, want to see adoption and validation from their customers and those that ultimately will bring these things to market. So those are some of the things I would recommend to founders and some of the things investors are looking for.
Yeah.
But it's really an interesting time. I think probably most excited time to be investing in my career.
I love that. I love that. And I think you mentioned a few times about the reimbursement stage. And I think that is where a lot of founders and companies have been caught because has that changed? Just asking naively, has that the importance of like looking at reimbursement changed in terms of when you should be doing it now as a CEO as opposed to like perhaps, 10 years ago?
You definitely need to have a strong strategy and a playbook that you can convincingly, uh, put in front of investors and build your business around. It can't be an afterthought. It can't be a, hey, we'll get to that later. And I think that's been the case for some 5 or 7 years now. Founders are realizing that. That said, you can have the best, plan, and as Mike Tyson says, everyone's got a plan until I punch you in the face. And so the truth is you get to a place where you may have that plan and then you get to interacting with CMS or payers and find out that that's not, something has changed and that may not be acceptable to them. And frankly, sometimes we'll just get it wrong, meaning they probably should have granted you that that payment level or that coverage decision, but their incentives aren't there, or they're looking at so many things that it's hard to, they're not fully understanding a technology and the data, and they need that re-explained to them, or different teams come in and there's a changing of folks in the seats, and you kind of have to move quickly. And the easier thing for folks to do is, for these agencies to do, is to deny as opposed to approve. And that can, when a company is burning and preparing for commercial activities around the time that they're managing reimbursement, the burn is highest. The time sensitivity to positive decisions is greatest, and it can shut the doors down on a company. It can cause companies to fold if it's gone wrong, and unfortunately, we've had experiences like that. So in general, I view reimbursement as probably the biggest risk right now to this whole field and this whole space. Um, there are constantly new initiatives that are being rolled out by governments, and they come out like press releases, and then everyone has to react and figure out how do they make heads or tails of these. Um, and so that's an area that I too, you know, spend time trying to support from an industry perspective.
Good. And really good that you're using your relationships to help there. And also, one of the things I picked up on is like, if you've got something really disruptive, part of your role you said was even to educate the investors, but also perhaps to educate the reimbursement pathway a good time ahead. Um,
Exactly.
yeah.
I think some investors will get it and others won't. And I mean, the risk too is that you may get, this is a founder challenge, and everybody's a risk, is if you attract a bunch of investors that are excited to put in money into your company, um, but don't understand the business, technically, and if your board doesn't understand the business very well and hasn't had experience running through that, you may be setting yourself up for failure at future rounds. You just don't know it yet. You may feel very good about pulling together that round and getting to advance the business a bit further. Um, but if you don't have good guidance and mentorship around, and if you're not that type of a thirsty learner, like I was describing some of the founders we like to work with, you may really just be delaying a more costly, you know, uh, mistake, or a costly realization in the future for not having sought that information out early and really developed a strong strategy. So that's often very evident in the founders you speak to. They've done their homework or they haven't.
Yeah. And they, I mean, everybody wants investment, but I guess also you're saying is be careful who you allow to invest with you. I mean,
Absolutely, yeah. I've been in experiences where the tail can wag the dog. Where, like, the
mm,
CEO has been, coached to put very lofty growth pers- prospects up in front of new investors. Um, and then they realize they got to live with that on the other side of successful financing, is like, okay, now you got to go deliver on that. And if you cannot, or if it's a stretch to generate what you've developed, it's a really tough existence, despite it all looking amazing from the outside in terms of the syndicates and the dollars that have come in.
which leads to all these bridge rounds, etc. But you've got I know behind you you've got this photo from a patient with from one of your companies. Like, can you tell me a little bit about each of your companies? You've got an amazing portfolio. You've got Murthy there at Setpoint Medical. You've got Carla Health, Diana. You've got such a massive portfolio, and you've sat on all of those boards. I mean, how does your head deal with that? And why did you even go into these companies?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, the artwork I think I was pointing out to you before is this cutting board here from Kelly Owens, one of the first patients in the set point rheumatoid arthritis clinical trial using vagus nerve stimulation to treat rheumatoid arthritis. And if you haven't seen her her story, it's definitely worth looking up. But she's someone I've gotten to know over the years, and just supporting her artwork. She also makes guitars or decorates guitars with amazing artwork. So just to me, I do think it's about the patient.
That's one. I know you like your music. Has she done one for you yet?
No, honestly, she started doing the guitars after I got the cutting board, so I'll have to go back for a guitar. No, so I'm just, I definitely have an affinity for music and live music and instruments, and so I think, honestly, I've sort of approached music as if like you're searching for that founder, that early unknown, up and coming artist, who you identify before maybe the masses appreciate their talent and their capabilities. And so I think there's a little bit of a parallel between finding great founders and finding great musicians before others know them. So yeah, so a lot of this artwork is around folks I've seen in small venues around where I live or around the country. But no, in terms of the companies themselves, uh, you know, each one has its own origin story and period of time where you're deep in the diligence and excited about investing and leading or co-leading rounds, and the board work honestly doesn't feel like work when you're executing and when the management teams are executing. They all have stages and phases, and management may change over time. And I think it's healthy a lot of times to have those changes done, especially when the boards and the management teams have alignment, and it can be done in a way where it's collaborative and sort of ideally planned. Um, but each company. So you mentioned SetPoint; they have FDA approval. They're an early commercial launch, but I think have a huge potential that for the impact to patients and the tolerability and safety of the vagus nerve stimulation versus say biologics and others that have they're really hard for patients to stay on. So this new mechanism, I think, this is being well received by the community. Um, and I should mention the companies that now that we've spun out of GSK, the companies that I'm mentioning are managed inside of a fund called Synapse Fund, which is in partnership with SR1, our sister fund within GSK that spun out a few years before us. So I'm getting a chance to work with that team closely as well on these companies. And those include SetPoint, Cala Health, which you mentioned, which is a wrist-worn watch that stimulates the median and ulnar nerves for treating essential tremor and
Yeah.
or action tremor in Parkinson's as well, or two indications. Also commercial and um, generating and growing revenue, selling across the VA and Medicare, Medicare Advantage plans now as well, and have a national coverage decision, which turned out to be a great thing.
Inspire, they're not part of your model, but that they've gone through that recently, are going through that, aren't they, as well, in a different way, but again with the reimbursement. But yeah, absolutely. Carla Health.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, no, and but just amazing to see the impact of patients. There's a Valentine's story on Cala Health of a former veteran who was brought to tears as he's telling the story of how he gets to hold his wife's hand during a Valentine's dinner. He's never been able to do that for so long, and so all these things are people, stories and people that are behind these technologies. But so we're lucky enough to work with the founders and the management teams that bring them to market. But at the end of the day, it's still about these patients and they're somebody's family, right? They're and I
Yeah.
know we all have our experiences with the healthcare system. Um, and so whether it's these therapies treating chronic diseases, another company, Alpheus Medical, treats glioblastoma in a clinical stage company right now using a drug and an ultrasound, external ultrasound source that activates the drug and leads to cell death. Uh, Is there another example of kind of a drug device combination or a engineered therapeutic?
Excellent in that. Yeah.
Uh,
You're
and
Dave
then,
leading that team now, isn't he?
yeah, Dave Van Meter, who came over from Ivantis, and has been a great commercial leader in some of these companies in our field, and I think primed for a great run there as well. Um, and then I would say, uh, you know, um, we had a company go public a few weeks ago, microtransponder renamed Mobia. So Mobia went public on the Nasdaq and is treating stroke patients with rehabilitation that's uh, improved by neuroplasticity through a vagus nerve stimulator. And so a lot of the team there are folks we've worked with at other companies that joined in the years just prior to going public. Particularly interesting to me is that the patients that do well, even years or up to like I think over a decade of post stroke, can still benefit from this procedure. At least that's been the experience in some real world cases. So, um, we're hopeful that that continues to be, uh, very profound for folks and becomes more like the standard of care for stroke patients that could benefit.
What you
So,
Yeah, be amazing to think like, like at one point AIDS was like a death sentence, wasn't it? But like people can live like, and it'd be amazing to think that actually the stroke isn't the end of it, that you can carry on rehabilitating, capturing movement, whether it's through BCIs and whatever, whichever approach, it really doesn't matter as long as it happens for me anyway. Obviously, I'm not the inventor.
yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's that's what I think gets most people up in this industry in the morning, right? To just come and see if they can deliver something that then, I mean, because there's a stark difference between going to a, family holiday dinner and being asked what you do for work and talking about something that, may be quite financially lucrative, that is um, a tool for operational efficiency in a, enterprise SaaS type setting, or whatever. There are many productive careers, and all of them can be quite rewarding to different levels. But I personally, and I think folks in our industry personally, take a lot of pride and re- uh, find it particularly rewarding to talk about how they are helping people and patients, because everybody knows how dark and lonely it can feel when you're up against disease or challenges with the healthcare system for you or your family members. And I think that's, uh, kind of like I think of my friend Rami Elgindor from uh, Nevro and Arcellx. He wears superhero T-shirts. I think he loves superheroes, and he's always had that affinity, particularly as Superman. But it does feel like you're doing, important work when you're in this field, and that's good to to flex that, when you can, because it's hard work. It also has lots of, you know, challenges, more challenges than many other industries to navigate, but it's important work.
It is, and I think, I mean, just personally, that's why I do it, I mean, I wanted to be a neurosurgeon and, I developed like PTSD from some time in the hospital, but I could have been doing like recruitment anywhere. But I feel like I'm helping people to actually get the technology out to the future, to the patients and finding the best people to do that. And I resonate with so many of the companies in your portfolio. Like my father had Parkinson's, Carla Health would have been amazing for him. Um, the glioblastoma, a bit ago, I got told I could have had terminal cancer and they couldn't have dealt with it. So that was a bit of uncertainty. It was in the brain, it was in somewhere the pons, I mean, this is an amazing space and you've chosen phenomenally. And like now you're out of your evergreen funds. So how's this going to change for you? This is a whole new world. Um, How's that going to like taking on risks now in new companies? Because actually, you've learned a lot of brilliant lessons that you can bring forward into this space from underwriting.
Absolutely, no, and first off, too, hats off to you for being such a brave, individual. I know we talked prior about your own path, with cancer and other, other paths, other challenges, and I would just say, like, phenomenal that you're bringing shining a light on, this space and individuals, and trying to find the right combinations of people to go then bring forward the next solutions and treatments and therapies for those other patients that inevitably come next. So, but no, in terms of this new fund, we're excited. See, exactly. So we will remain Action Potential Venture Capital in the new fund, and we will broaden our we're broadening our remit. We're building companies with founders at Frontier Health. Really, we're seeing opportunity both in sort of the frontier patient, so patient empowerment. Helping individuals with the use of technology navigate the healthcare system more effectively and their care, the care of their loved ones, the care that they require outside of traditional sites of care like hospitals and clinics. And the same for providers and the healthcare system that I think has the opportunity to embrace and become much more efficient, and able to deliver that experience that I think patients really deserve for the benefit of outcomes, safety, cost effectiveness, avoidance of burnout, upskilling healthcare providers that armed with technology can do more than what they have historically been trained to do. And so that to me is again back to like the superhero reference. Like you can augment people in pretty amazing ways, especially if technology is developed right, to to really lift up the entire system and hopefully also break down the silos and the fragmentation that's seen in a lot of the healthcare system, at least in the US. So we're extremely excited about building with early stage frontier health founders at the pre-seed seed stage and opportunistically in some slightly later stage rounds, but also continuing the work we do in neurotech and engineered therapeutics, to bring new categories of technology to bear, as well as in diagnostics. So we've invested in companies that have, had 10 plus FDA approvals with software as a medical device and imaging technology and diagnostic technology. And so we'll continue to seek out those opportunities. Um, and physical AI is another area where we really see a lot of potential in the healthcare system, where it goes beyond the, you know, cognitive and text based LLMs that a lot of products have been developed for to date. We're getting specialized into the healthcare system and interface and interacting with the many elements that are, again, whether it's in manufacturing, whether it's in sensors and patient monitoring, diagnostics, imaging. Physical AI will be a central piece of the future of healthcare. So we're also leaning in there. And consumer health, which to your point, I think we have not historically focused on so much, but we view as, we're seeing a change in the space between the CGMs, the Aura rings, the Whoop watches, and their actually recent partnerships with many life science and medical companies that are now demonstrating the potential of, these understanding the patient, uh, you know, throughout their life, throughout their tradition, their activities, informing them about how best to manage their own care, especially when it is so challenging to see specialists and to find care and the cost of care. So I think these consumer health devices will absolutely, um, develop more opportunities for investors and for solutions for patients. Um, and at the end of the day, I think it's, you know, building in this space at this time is just kind of a unique moment, um, that frankly, to me, calls on so much of like everything that I've done to this point in my career to really deliver on. And so I'm really just fired up to be working alongside other founders that are taking that risk and building these new enterprises.
I can see that. I can see that. I think what's exciting also is like with the consumer health and maybe other things, it's like we could start looking at it from preventative, not just also the other end. So, tackling it not once we've got a problem, but trying to stop that problem before it actually becomes a problem would be amazing, wouldn't it, as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. No, it's something that I won't name names, but I remember standing up at one of my first jobs in industry and asking the CEO in a town hall meeting, how come we're not doing as much in the preventative health space? Uh, and I got a non-answer, and I later realized, CEOs can be crafty in their ability to not answer questions they don't want to answer. And and I was young in my career, and I started to realize, oh wait, there has not historically been as much of a way to generate income and build business I think that's changing. I think, companies like Cityblock and others that are helping provide care to the less, accept the least accessible, um, folks in the healthcare system of our socioeconomic status, Medicaid patients, Medicare, that there's now an increasing understanding and perhaps more by those who uh, bear carry the risk or have the burden of the risk of those patients if they do have catastrophic events and they own the cost. So insurance companies and payers and um, healthcare systems who now have never events and other type of implications for not treating those patients. I think that has changed and is changing further. Um, and so that plus the value of data and these evolving business models, I think will drive prevention as an area of investment, for select areas.
Well, thanks, Juan Pablo. I mean, I'm I've loved speaking with you. I can't believe the journey that you've come. You probably can't believe it either, how you've ended up here and the world has changed since you entered it. Um, and I'm so glad that you're here in this space and you're fighting the cause for investors for technology, etc. But it's great to tell the world, hey, you're open for business, aren't you? Yeah. And you at a lot wider things now. You're still big in the neuro, but you're looking broader as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a time to really be picking our heads up and thinking about how is what will the healthcare system look like in the future. I mean, you hear this concept of abundant clinical resources, and how would you design the healthcare system differently if it wasn't designed in a system of constraints and cost, but if in fact you had abundance of clinical contact and agentic um, tools at your disposal to manage patients and avoid catastrophic events and so forth. And so I know Majal at Hippocratic is someone I've talked to extensively about that. And um, to me, those are really unique opportunities, moments in time, and you got to pick your head up and look at opportunities for where this is going. And we will continue to invest in big opportunities in the brain and the nervous system. Um, you know, BCI and other things are we watch very closely and are excited about. Um, but it's kind of never been a more fun time if you're a builder or an investor in this frontier and deep tech space. So that's kind of what I'm most fired up to do.
I bet. I can't imagine the underwriting equations and jumps that you have to go through in your head, but that's great. And, you know, I guess one unfair question to you is which of the companies in your platform are you perhaps most proud of? Not because they've maybe done them best or whatever it might be. It could be that they've gone through trials, tribulations, whatever. Is there a special baby in that portfolio?
There are several. I mean, Set Point is one I've just been involved with since such the earliest phases. It was a company, Morgenthaler, my first venture firm, incubated, and so I attended as a board observer, and I've seen that. Worked with Kevin Tracy and Paul Peter Tack and other people, Jim Broderick, who were involved in the very, very beginning, and then you know watched it go through so many permutations and go from a large Canon lead-like system to a microstimulator that really, I think, hits the product market fit that is needed for a patient who is considering a drug or a surgery for the first time. And this micro stimulator, the size of a multivitamin and a single incision in the neck, is, I think, really appealing to patients. So we've gone through this journey. I was on the CEO selection committee in bringing Murthy on as the CEO of the company and working with Anthony Arnold in that transition. Uh, you know, to me, where we sit now is probably one of the most exciting companies in our portfolio. Um, I would say if I had another to mention, it's not in our portfolio. It's one that I helped co-found with friends and physicians at Stanford. It's called Gradient Denervation, and it treats
I know him well. Yeah.
yeah treats pulmonary hypertension. Um, you know, Swami was a biodesign fellow. He came in as an intern with us at Lightstone Ventures, and when he decided to start the business, but then go back to surgical training and cardiothoracic training, he asked me to take the business forward, find a CEO, find funding, and I worked with him and Jeff Feinstein, the physician cardiologist at Stanford, to get that business. And we've worked with MD Start to get it funded to move the company from California to Paris, France. And we, managed to work with Martin Grass, who's come on as a CEO, has just been phenomenal. And so I've had the pleasure of continue to being involved from the early co-founder days till now as a board director. And I just think the impact is massive for patients with pulmonary hypertension, which is such a tough disease, both for adults when it's comorbid with other conditions like heart failure, but also for children. And so I know that's, Jeff Feinstein's, in fact, a pediatric cardiologist. That's been the mission as well for him, is to see this denervation of the airways, the autonomic nerves that cause vasoconstriction in the lungs, to release that tension and relax those vessels. And so this is a new category I think is really exciting. So it's just fun to have been part of that journey since the beginning with that team and see where they are. But no, it's hard to pick a favorite kid. But no, they're all very special.
Well, do you know what? I think what comes across is that, you mentioned a few mentors like Larry Briggs and others. It's obvious that you see the potential in others, or they maybe see it and you put the belief in them. So thank you very much for doing that. And it's been a real pleasure speaking with you, Juan Pablo. And, I'm going to be keeping close tabs on your fund and seeing what you're doing.
Thank you so much, Liz. Really appreciate this chance to talk, and I always enjoy conversations. Hopefully, more in the future, and excited to see what this whole industry looks like, 5 to 10 years from now. So hopefully, we can retouch base then.
Yeah, you and me too. Take and speak soon. And
Sounds good. Take care. Bye bye.